At what age did you start pursuing real estate? When did that become a thing?
Yes, I got into real estate when I was 24. It was funny because I kind of got in by accident. I was trying to go to college for like I got my 2 year degree. I was trying to do my 4 year degree, but I didn't realize you have to apply like 6 months in advance. So I had this basically I had 6 months with nothing to do, and a buddy of mine was like, "Dude, we should get our real estate licenses." And so I just was like, "Yeah, let's do it." If nothing else, I'd learn how to buy and sell real estate. And so that's kind of how I got into it first.
The entrepreneurial spirit that came from home, or how did that get instilled in you?
It's yeah, I mean, I was always like a little hustler. I always just
Hmm.
I don't know, I just wanted to have a good life, I wanted to have money. I wanted to do cool shit with my life. And so I was always, just kind of looking for opportunities and trying to hustle and everything.
Yeah, no, I hear you. You've done like a lot. You've been involved with like a lot. I saw real estate. I saw the OUR project. Obviously, men's coaching. What's the overarching like philosophy behind it? Like, why does it work? Like, whatever you do, it sort of works. How do you
Well,
explain that?
sure. No, and well, first off, not everything I do works. I
Sure.
just, you kind of learn that the hard
Appears
way.
that way, though. Yeah.
I've had plenty of things that didn't. In fact, like, I mean, I'll just kind of give you a little background in that. When I was 21, I started a business doing Christmas lights and putting up and taking out people's Christmas lights. It actually worked pretty good. And then I tried to do this meat business and it went good. I was making good money, but I partnered and tried to go too big too soon. Didn't really know what I was doing and ended up getting stuck with like $120,000 debt
Hmm.
when I shut down the company, so it didn't work. Uh, I decided to get into real estate, and I think there's a formula for success. It's really pretty simple. It's figure out what to do, figure out how to do it, and then do it all day. And that's really that simple. So whether you're selling marketing for your TV show or houses to people, or with my men's coaching program, trying to sell people into joining We Are the They, whatever it is that I'm doing, I mean, if you follow that formula, you just work your butt off, it's very hard not to succeed. And I think where most people get stuck is either they don't get clarity on what they're trying to do, they don't get the skills and knowledge they need to be great at it. Like when I was in real estate, I'll just give you an idea. Like I was the number one agent in my county one year, and I went to Arizona State to get my master's in real estate during that time because I wanted to be that much better than the competition. I wanted to learn even that much more what I needed to do to stand out versus everybody else. So I just made it so stupid to want to use anyone else. It's just I was giving more than anybody else. I was learning more than anybody else. I knew more than anybody else. And so because of that, the business came to me very naturally. Even with my men's program, kind of the same thing, right? Like I looked at who are the mentors that are the best in the world at this. And it was Tony Robbins, Ed Milet, and Neil Strauss were my three guys that I thought were the best. So I hired all three of them to coach
Hmm.
me. Ed and Neil coached me one on one, and Tony, I joined his very private group of individuals that I coached with him. And so I spent, almost $400,000 in 1 year to be coached by the best people in the industry. I wanted to learn what I didn't know. I wanted to be the best at this. And so I think one of the things that I've always been willing to do is just investing in myself, whether that was the time or the money to learn. And when you do that, you find out again what you want to do, find out how to do it. That's the part where you got to, hire coaches and mentors. That's what I do. I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, and people hire me if they want to start a coaching group now because they're like, Jimmy's doing this, right? I have 500 members. I've sold out my program every time I open it. And so we've just had a lot of success. I've learned a lot of things that you can do the right way. And so now people hire me and I can teach them in 1 year what it would have taken them 10 years to figure out on their own. And so I think just investing in yourself to get great at the thing you're going to do, and then doing it all day, right? Like I have to be fully invested in what I'm doing, and I do it all day long.
Hmm. What's the main takeaway from $400,000 invested?
Oof. And I've spent over $1 million in my life on coaching. I mean, here's my theory, man. We always got to be learning, right? There's always people that just know so much more than we do. And, one of the ways that you can change your life is to get around better people and find a mentor. Find out who is where you want to be that used to be where you're at now. And then try to figure out how to be around those people. So maybe it's joining a coaching program. Maybe it's hiring them as a coach. Maybe it's just reading their book. It could be as simple as that, or listening to a podcast like this one, right? But you've got to figure out how to get around those people as much as possible. And so I think the thing that most stood out to me is, there's a formula for success. And when you're around those people, I don't know how this works exactly, the science of it, but it's the law of just being in people's worlds, like of you have to what's the word I'm looking for, um just being, you have to be in those areas, you have to be around those people if you want to learn from them. And so your job is to do whatever you can to be in the room, to be with the right people, to be at the right dinners, to be on the right podcast, to do those things. And the more that you're willing to do that, the more that you put yourself in those positions, like the universe just answers and things will fall in your lap. When you're around big thinkers, you automatically are going to think bigger. When you're around successful people, you're going to assume that you're going to be successful. When you're around wealthy people that are good at investing, you'll probably be good at investing. If you're around people that waste their money and waste their time, you're probably going to waste your money and waste your time. And so getting around the right people, just being able to be in their world, is, I think, the most important part of all that.
Yeah. I want to touch on conversation building in a little bit, but just a quick one on that. Like keeping relationships going, keep providing value. What's your main thought on that? Because a lot of times, right, you meet someone, connect with them, throw the dice down. How do you keep that going?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it. Number one is you've got to have a reason to connect with them. Okay. So, like, you've done your podcast, that's what I have done as well. I have 650 episodes of my podcast now. And, I've been able to reach out and talk to some of the most successful people on the planet because I have a reason to follow up with them. I have a very successful podcast. So people reach out to me all the time. They want to connect. And then the other thing is you've got to, again, so number one is you got to have a reason for people to follow up with you. So, like, I had the opportunity to have dinner last week with Michael Phelps. Are you familiar with who that is?
Sure.
He's the Olympic swimmer. He won the most gold medals of all time, twice as many as anyone else. This dude's the GOAT. He might be the greatest athlete of all time. I had dinner with him last Monday.
Dope.
And there was about 15 of us there at the dinner. It was a pretty small dinner. And I had about 20 minutes alone with him. But also, while I was talking to him, a couple of guys came up and they said, "Hey, man, are you familiar with what Jimmy does with his coaching program? He helps men deal with all sorts of issues." Well, Michael Phelps used to suffer from depression. He actually checked himself into rehab between his second and third Olympics. And so it's very close to he cares a lot about that topic. And so as we got talking, I said, "Yeah, man, you're actually one of the guys I would absolutely love to have on my podcast." He said, "Yeah." And we just talked enough that we became, I would say, acquaintances, close to being friends, to the point where I will now be able to eventually get him on my podcast. I have a reason to follow up with him.
Mhm.
And so most people that are successful, they're just very busy. And so they don't have time to do things that don't benefit them at all. Like, they just don't. They're just a million different people want their time, want their attention. And so you've got to find ways to create value for them. You've got to find a way to create enough value that they want to follow up with you. And it's your job as the person that's trying to connect with them to figure out where that value can come from. So everybody needs something. And it's your job to figure out what it is and to provide that for them. And that's how you do it. And then the other part of it is you just got to care. Like, you have to honestly care about them. When people know you care about them,
Mhm.
they know that they know that it's worth spending some time, and they're willing to do things for you as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Love that. I want to touch on the Operation Underground Railroad because that's like probably the one cause I'm like truly passionate about. I saw Sound of Freedom, what was it, 2 years back?
Mm-hmm.
Deeply fascinated by it, and reading that you were involved with, very cool. Can you touch on what it was like working with those guys and sort of your takeaway from that?
Yeah, man. I mean, it was a gift of a lifetime. I keep on my desk right here. I'll show you. This is some of the money that we used to rescue the kids from one of the ops. That's me with the federal police and Tim in
Cool.
Mexico. But I had the chance to go on 13 ops. I know we rescued probably about 130 kids on those ops. We, had probably 30 or 40 guys that we got arrested, or people we got arrested. There were women as well, but it was just an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to help and be a part of that. And, and I know it wasn't a perfect system. It wasn't perfect the way they did it. OUR's come under fire a lot, the last year
Sure.
or so, and Tim as well. But I know this, I was there when we did those rescues, and we helped rescue a lot of kids, man. And we got some bad people arrested. Like, there was one op that we did in Mexico, and the school teacher, she was an 8th grade school teacher, and she was using her position in school to lure these kids to these parties where they would be essentially raped and taken advantage of. And just putting that person away, who knows how many dozens or hundreds of other kids we helped that never had to go down that road, you know, and so it was really cool. Like one of the ops you see on my sweatshirt, it says "We are the They." That's the name of my coaching program. One of the ops we came back from, this was kind of just, it just changed my whole life, just being able to have this opportunity. But we came back from one of the ops. My girlfriend picked me up in my truck on the way home from the airport, and as we were driving, she pulled over and she goes, "Hey, I don't want you to do this anymore." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Did you not just hear what I said? We just had this big takedown, you know, we rescued these kids." She says, "I know, but it's like, it's a really bad environment. It's, you know, it's a dangerous setting." And I was like, "I know, but it's going to be part of my life's work now." And she says, "Well, why can't they just go do it?" And without even thinking, I said, "Well, there is no they. We are the they." And so that's the name of my brand now, right? That's my motto. It shot shivers down my spine. I was just like, oh my gosh, like we are the they. Like nobody else is going to come save us. We have to be the ones that do this. We have to be the people that step up and do something about it. And so, yeah, that's just a little background of it. But yeah, man, it was crazy. We had some incredible experiences, scary, but so fulfilling at the same time. And, you know, and it was cool. Like in the movie The Sound of Freedom, you know, they obviously exaggerate a lot. They combined several different ops into one, so it looked like it was, you know, more happening. It usually wasn't that dramatic, if I'm being honest, but it was cool to be able to be a part of that and be able to help some people.
Yeah, sure. Can you share a story that stayed with you the most from your work there?
Just a story that stands out the most. Yeah, I mean, we had, um, you know, we what was interesting was when I first heard about it, I was like, okay, I want to be involved with this. I just heard somebody speaking about it, and I thought, you know, what a perfect setup for me. I don't have a family to worry about. I'm a single guy, so like if something happens to me, it's like it's better than having to go a married guy
Right.
or with kids, right? I had money to be able to, we always funded our own ops. I had time on my hands. And so we went and we started doing this. And, you know, it's these guys that I went and did it with, it became some of my best friends in the whole world when you're putting each other's lives in each other's hands. But, you know, the op that I was just talking about, the one where we came back from, I mean, that particular op, we met these guys down again in Latin America, and they were. I always said like in the trafficking world, you had bad guys and you had like evil guys. Like bad guys are like they're pimping out their niece or their neighbor or something like that, right? Sometimes their own children, and they're terrible, terrible people. But they weren't organized crime around this. They're not going around and trying to build up like a business around trafficking kids. Then there was like the evil people, and that's what they were doing. And this particular op, we'd gone in and we met a dude that was pretty bad dude, and you know, and they showed us that they had kids that they were trafficking and everything else. So we started working with the federal police and getting this all squared away. And then that dude called us one day and he said, "Hey," the next night, he's like, "Hey, I want to introduce you to my boss." And we were told he was the boss. So we're like, "Oh, I thought you were the boss." He's like, "No, no, this is like the boss." And so we it was pretty scary, but we went and we met this guy, and I mean it was like they had a perimeter set, they had guys on each end, they had guns on them. And the only reason we didn't get killed is because they fully believed that we were there, you know, to do business with them. And and it was really scary, man. And I speak Spanish. I used to, in another life, I served a Mormon mission. And so I lived in Mexico for 2 years and learned Spanish. And so I was the one speaking to these guys, trying to communicate with them and put this deal together. And we had it recorded. We had, you know, undercover cameras. And it was 18 minutes where we're talking to these guys. And during that time, I mean, it was about as scary as you can imagine. And but we were able to, you know, negotiate this. And then when we did the takedown, it's kind of a funny story, but we when they were like basically when they came in, they took these dudes down. I remember when they were tasing the guy and he's screaming. It was like the best noise because this guy was such a dick.
Hmm.
He thought he was the coolest dude. He's trafficking all these kids, and just listening to him getting tased, and we're all handcuffed. They arrest us too. They put us in a different room, and then they take us to the airport instead of to the prison. But we're all sitting there handcuffed, just trying not to laugh as we hear this guy getting tased and just screaming, and you know, and that was a really special one to me because we were able to, you know, take down a dude that was doing a lot of damage.
Yeah. No, it's this. It's, it might sound like I'm being funny, but how do you not? I'm not being funny. How do you not kill these guys on sight?
Well, you have to play the role. You know, it's bigger than if you can't. And as a man in general, you got to learn to control your emotions, right? And so, like, we would just, to be honest, it felt like it was a movie. That's the best way I can put it.
Hmm.
We almost had to disassociate from it being real. where you're playing a role, you're using fake names, you're talking to each other, your whole backstory is fake, and so it felt like a movie is the best way I can put it. And that's the only reason why. But actually, let me tell another story that you wouldn't expect.
Sure.
We did another op. It was the first one I ever did, and keep in mind, we go down for a couple days, sometimes a week, to become friends with these guys to like get their confidence, right? And these guys were kind of just idiots. They were trafficking girls, but they were like friends of theirs, and they're just these dumb idiots. They were like in their 20s, and that he was like he was likable. Like that's the best way I can put it. Besides what he was doing, like he was nice. He was trying to be friendly with us. Obviously, he wanted our money and everything. But I remember when they showed up to the party. So we did this party to take him down, and I had this really just human moment where this guy walks in with the girls, and I know that in 15 minutes the federal police are going to come out. They're all hiding, and these dudes are going to be arrested, and for the rest of their lives they're going to probably be in prison. Like this is about to happen in 15 minutes. I know this is about to happen. And I'm watching this dude as he comes in the door, and I had this brief moment of just like pure empathy where I felt sad. I felt bad for him. I was like, what happened to you that you're this way? Like, why did you go down this path? Like, why did you have to be this way? And just to have this moment of empathy for him, I just felt sad for him, and it was just a very human moment. Now, then he started opening his mouth and talking about these women and the girls in a terrible way again, and I remembered, this dude does need to go away. But it was just this human moment, and so it's not like, I think that you hear it and you're like, oh, these people are like so horrible and awful, and it's like, no, they're like normal dudes that like have made some bad decisions, and it was actually eye-opening of like how quickly your life can go south if you're not careful. It wasn't, these guys weren't criminals their whole life and just making horrible decisions their whole life. They made some bad decisions, and it's led to them being in this place where they're at. But it was just interesting. It's more human than you would think.
Is it just ignorance on their part, or some of them are
No,
like truly,
it
truly just to the
depends. Like
core bad?
sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's desperation, sometimes it's just greed, a little of everything. I mean, what causes somebody to traffic another human? The whole it can be anything, but like a lot of hurt people hurt people. We know that, but I think more than anything, honestly, greed is probably the thing. They just that was the way they could make the most money, and they didn't really care who was hurt in that process. And I think that was the biggest problem or the biggest downfall of most of those guys.
Yeah, interesting. Has that like experiencing that changed your outlook on just people in general? I'm
For
sure it
sure,
did.
man. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to feel sorry for yourself because your dad didn't give you enough time when you see dads
Yeah,
trafficking their kids, and all of a
yeah.
sudden you're like, yeah, it's, my buddy Jeremy, he tells the story. He's a public speaker. I actually heard him talk about this on Sunday. He was speaking to a group with that I spoke at as well. And he was with us on those ops, and he talked about going on his first op with us. He came and we had this big takedown, rescued these kids, but he sees the position these kids are in for their life. Well, he flew from that op to meet up with his family, was at Disneyland. And so he goes to Disneyland the next day after doing this takedown, right? And he said that he's in line, and these people are bitching about, the heat, and bitching about having to wait in line, and just like the things that were like bothering them. And
Hmm.
he was just like, I'm just so grateful for my life, for my freedom, for my family being safe, like all these things. And it just put into perspective, I think. I think it really puts into perspective the day-to-day things that are happening in our world.
Yeah, no, I see that. You have any idea how the kids you were involved with, the aftercare they got and how they're doing and everything?
No, unfortunately, they didn't do a very good job of updating us on the aftercare. It's one of the knocks that you hear, people online talking about the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, to be honest. I never really, they didn't really update us on the aftercare, what happened with the kids.
Mm, yeah, I hear you. More lighthearted note, the coaching program, because that's an interesting one too. Deeply intriguing as well. Um, gives you quite a unique perspective, right? Working with a lot of men all over the world on their struggles and what is going on with them. The most common one you're encountering these days, guys that come to you that work with you, what's going on with them?
Yeah. So, about 5, 6 years ago, I was in my real estate career, and I was loving life. Everything was going well. I had the best year I ever had that year. I sold the most expensive home ever in Utah that year. It was $32.5 million.
Nice.
Made over $1 million basically in one day. Um, and just life was just, going awesome. But I had this epiphany. There was another realtor that worked kind of the same way that I do. Um, and during that time, he got killed collecting his rent check at a fourplex. And I remember in the news, it was like every story was like realtor die, realtor gets killed. And I remember thinking to myself, if I died tomorrow and the only thing I was remembered at was a realtor, like I'd actually feel pretty sad about that. Like I'm so much more than just being a realtor. And so I started kind of really thinking like, well, what could I do that would leave a bigger impact on the world? What could I do to, really help more people in this planet? And it kind of through a 2 year process of trying to figure this out, it came to me that the thing that I do really well that I've, been able to help a lot of people is I help men connect and become close friends. And I thought, oh, I know exactly how to do this. And so I started playing with this idea. What if I didn't do real estate? What if I did this instead? And so I just took all the experience that I had from years of going to coaching and seminars and all these different programs, and I put it all into this program and just launched it 3 years ago and call it We Are the Day. And it's really been awesome. It's grown like crazy. We've grown, 300% since year one into year three. And, I've been able to see these miracles happen all over the place. But really, as much as anything, I just saw that there's this huge need. Like men don't have connection with other men like they used to. We don't have these friendships that are, these deep connected friendships like in the past. And so I just knew it was going to be something that this world needs, and it's been really fun to be able to do it, man. And so that's how I came about launching this program.
Yeah. How do you help them? What's different from the way it was 50 years ago? And how do you get that back in them?
Yeah, I mean, we have more access to people and information than ever, but we're less connected than ever. And so I
Right.
think the way that I sum it up is I help men connect to themselves and then connect to other people. And so just helping people to recognize the needs that they have. Like a lot of people in this world wear a mask, especially men, right? I've actually teaching this on a call today with my group. You got the stoic mask, the athlete mask, the material mask, the sexual mask, the aggressive mask, invisible mask, the know-it-all mask, the Joker mask, and the alpha mask. And I took all this from my buddy Lewis Howes, wrote a book about it called The Mask of Masculinity. But we wear these masks so that people, and what happens is we've been punished in the past for being vulnerable or being too authentic. And so we don't show people our real selves because it doesn't hurt. If somebody rejects the version of you I'm giving you, that's not very painful. If you don't like this version, it's like, well, whatever, I'm not really showing you who I am. But when you take that mask off and you let yourself be seen, and what most men think is like, oh, if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't love me.
Mhm.
And so I think what I try to do is help men recognize, like, hey, if I can help you take that mask off and be seen in that state with you don't have that mask on, I mean, you'll break through a wall for that person because you just know that, that they truly love you. And I think if you've ever met somebody that you're pouring into them, it's like a bucket with holes in it. No matter how much you pour into them, it feels like it's not working. And it's because typically they're wearing a mask. And so even though you're giving them love, to them, they're like, well, this is just the version I'm showing you. And so they don't actually get to feel and receive that love.
Mhm.
And so what I try to help men do through a series of many different things is be able to take off that mask, be a little bit vulnerable, be authentic, get into integrity if they need to, because then they're seen for everything they are and everything they're not, and they're still loved in that state. And becomes a really beautiful thing.
This is something I've personally struggled with, still struggling with. I went to a coaching program, I believe, 2, 3 years ago. We talked about exactly this thing. And I was like, it's like, let's say you want to get better at basketball, right? You can just throw free throws all day. But being vulnerable, that's not something you sort of actively do, right? And then my conclusion from like, I'd say 3, 4 years of struggling with this is just um trying, and eventually it's gonna fix itself. But that's the idea. But what's your view on that? Not
Yeah,
being
I
able
mean,
to truly practice it, but yeah, having faith in it in a
yeah,
way.
I think it's a series of like, I think you said it really well. Like, it's just working on it, it's practicing it, it's that uncomfortability. And we do a lot of things to get ourselves uncomfortable. The ice bath became really popular over the last couple of years. And what it is just get yourself to do something that's scary or that isn't comfortable, right? And so I have a buddy, we actually were at his house last night. He just finished doing 365 days in a row of an ice bath. And you might say to yourself, well, what does that have to do with this? Well, it's just falling in love with the idea of doing things that make you uncomfortable. So it's doing something that pushes you past your level of comfortability. We live in a world today, 2024, where it's just really easy to be comfortable, man. We got food at our fingertips. We've got, in the past, it took a hero's effort to go out and find a woman. Now you just swipe right enough times, you're going to find somebody to connect with. And like, it's just everything is very accessible and it's very comfortable to be alive today. Like, I have the perfect degree in my house that I want it to be for the weather, even though it's 20 degrees outside, it's 72 in my home. You know what I mean? It's just like, so we have to do things to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. And it starts to teach us that like that's how we grow and that's how we progress. And I think that's an important piece in all this.
How do you practice it? Being truly vulnerable.
Well, have to be in spaces that are safe. And so you put yourself in positions like that's why I have my men's group because there wasn't a great place out there for this. I didn't feel like. And so, but you've put yourself in a place where you have maybe it's just one friend, maybe it's a series of people, and then you share something that you think makes you unlovable, right? You share that thing that you think, well, if they ever knew this, they wouldn't love me. But you practice it, you share it, you say, hey, man, or it can be as simple as like, I'll give you an example. I had a buddy and I invited him to speak at my event last year. And I had about 400 people at the event. It was a big speaking gig, biggest one he's ever had. And he's never really spoken before. He's not like a speaker. So he gets up there and he's kind of fumbling through his words. And this is a dude that's very well put together. This guy's a badass, right? But he's fumbling through his words and he's trying to kind of piece together this talk. And then he stops himself and he says, guys, I'm sorry. I actually need a second. Like I am so nervous. I'm not used to speaking in front of big groups and it's kind of freaking me out a little bit. Give me just a second to catch my breath. And you could just see how it endeared the whole crowd to him. Like if you were a professional speaker, that's the last thing you would do because it'd make it look like you don't know what you're doing. And he just owned it. He just said, "God, I'm like really nervous right now." He's like, "This is actually scaring me." And the whole crowd just like loved it because he expressed that vulnerability in real time.
Mhm. I like it. It's interesting. It's easy to sort of not do it and to just stay the way you are for like
Yeah,
years.
like just toughen up and just like whatever. I'm not going to talk about it, and whatever else that might look like.
I went through this like I'd say like a 2 month period of like cold approaching every day. That was a tough one. With like without a support system or anything. It was fun. Yeah. But
Yeah, I
stuff
mean
like that. Yeah.
when I started my real estate career, man, I just would call for sale by owners every single day for 3 hours, just cold calling people and just not being attached to the outcome, learning to handle rejection a little bit better, some of those things.
Hmm. I like it. Um your understanding of friendship evolved through coaching, working with these guys.
Yeah, I learned a lot through these different programs and being around people that just had been there before me, but also just being a good friend. I think most of the friendship stuff I figured out firsthand just by having a lot of friends, putting myself out there and trying to be a good friend to other people.
Hmm. Challenge you faced, like aligning what you're teaching with your actions yourself. Was there a moment or a thing you truly struggled with?
Well, there's plenty of things that I struggle with.
Sure.
Yeah. It's one of the things I've been working really hard on the last couple of years is like I call it embodiment work is what it's called, but it's basically getting out of your mind and getting into your body. And so, we have this moment between what happens to us and how we react, and in that moment is kind of really determined everything about us. And so I've been trying to work to get better at making better decisions, not letting those emotions take over and to, make the best of it. And so I do a lot of stuff like that right now currently, but constantly working of what it looks like to show up as a better friend, how to show up in relationships, how to hold space for people, how to ask better questions, right? Like all those kinds of things are the things that I try to, learn. And then I'm studying all the time. Like yesterday, I had a cool example. One of my guys I was coaching on our group call, he, I said, what's a problem you guys have been working through you haven't really been able to figure out? And he said, my son is 16 years old and he just leaves his shit all over the house and it drives me nuts. He's like, he's a great kid, but it drives me crazy. And I took him through this series of questions and this process. And then eventually I learned this from Simon Sinek, but I took him on this process where I had him close his eyes. And I said, he's 38 years old. I said, all right, I want you to fast forward 40 years. And I want you to think about when you're 78. That's the average time that men live, then they die. And I want you to think about what you would give if you're in that place 40 years from now, how much you would give, what you would be willing to do to get back to this spot right now, to that moment when your son was driving you nuts, and just be able to be present in that moment again. And he's like, I'd give everything. I said, exactly. And so don't lose this present moment because it's not the perfect situation. And so just like little things like that, where I can, because I'm always studying and I'm always trying to learn, it helps me to be able to show up for the people that I'm coaching and training as well.
Very good one. That's the thing I wanted to ask you actually. Like being present while pursuing whatever it is you're pursuing. That's a sort of a dangerous balance in my mind. How did you
What do you
manage to deal with it? Sort of like it's sort of like I have like 100 to 0 tattooed on my leg. It's like everything or nothing. Um, so there's like head down and working and or being in the present and like being sort of hedonistic. What's your view on that?
And how old are you, by the way?
21.
Yeah, so my opinion is in your 20s, that's how you should be. Head down, freaking balls to the wall, 80 hours a week. Let's go. You got the energy for it. You're
Right.
trying to build yourself up. I think that's great, honestly. I think in your 20s, you're trying to build yourself. I think in your 30s, you're trying to figure out, like, okay, what's going to be the significance of my life? Like, what's the purpose of all this? And then in your 40s, you start to slow it back down a little bit. It's like people like you and I. We're just in your 20s and 30s, they'll blast away, man. Try it all, screw things up, fall on your face, have fun with it, and say yes to everything, right? Your 30s, you start saying no to a lot more stuff. You just don't have the time or the energy for it. But in your 20s, man, I'm all for good balls to the wall. Sounds great to me.
That's the way to do it. I like it.
So I did, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, no, sure thing, man. Touch on the podcast a bit because you got a big show, man. Why do you think
Yeah,
it's
man.
why do you think it's successful in your mind?
Well, I take it very serious, and I love it. I think those are the two things. Like I treat it like a real business, and I love doing it. I absolutely love doing my podcast. I'm 650 episodes in, I think now, and I just get to have amazing conversations, every single day. I released one yesterday with Steven Jackson. He has one of the biggest podcasts in the world, and the week we filmed that, he had Kamala Harris on while she was running for president.
Mm.
I mean, it puts you in positions where you can meet some amazing people and have cool conversations. Like just being honest today, I appreciate your hustle and what you're trying to do at a young age, so I agreed to do this podcast. We weren't going to get on a call any other way. Like I wasn't going to just jump on an hour coaching call with you. I charge 5 grand an hour to do that. You know what I mean? But I'm willing to do this because you have a podcast and you're investing and you've really put yourself out there and you're putting the energy into it. And so it's a really great way to network. It's a really great way to, grow, to become a better uh, conversationalist, to just learn more about people. And so I love doing it. But I always tell people when they start a podcast. So how many episodes are you in right now, Quentin?
I believe this is 74.
Okay. So I always tell people if you get past 60, you're in the top 1% of podcasts. I don't know if you knew that or not. And so it's like, I always tell people, once you've done 35 podcasts, I'll come on if you're taking it serious, if it's like a friend or whatever, and then
Right.
it's a real, but the point is like, you're taking it serious and you're going to get a lot out of this. And so the thing that makes a podcast successful or not is that, like, how serious do you take it? Like, I'm jumping on a plane next week to go do a podcast just because I want to get the guest, right? I've probably done that maybe 40 times where I've jumped on a plane to be able to go sit down with a guest and
Mm.
be able to get on my podcast because that's how serious I take it. This is really important to me. And so, it's just but I think more than anything, what makes it successful is making it sure it's interesting. I try to do things that I like. I took this advice from Joe Rogan. He goes, I just like to interview people I find fascinating to talk to. And that's what I do too. It's just like, if I enjoy talking to you, let's jump on a podcast and we can chat. And as you start to get more successful with it, more and more people will say yes to your podcast. So now I can get just about anybody to come on my show because of the success that it's had. And so it snowballs on itself.
Things you would do, just taking advantage of the opportunity, right? Things you would do if you were at 74 episodes to get it to the point you're at.
What would I do?
Yeah, like looking at my show, what would you do?
I'd probably release 2 shows a week, and I would try to just I'd probably reach out to 50 to 100 people a week through Instagram and Twitter and try to get them on my show. The most interesting people out there, the biggest names, people that people want to listen to. I mean, you're in the Netherlands, so obviously you're not going to be doing them in person, but this is
Mhm.
fine. Do it over Riverside like you are. But I would just, I mean, how serious do you want to take it? And I would reach out to the most successful people that you can. I think you followed up with me quite a few times before we made this happen. So you're obviously a hustler, and people appreciate that, especially other hustlers. And so you only have to get a couple big names on there, and then you start using their name to get all the other names.
Hmm.
And, you know, that's what I would do.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm flying to Dubai in 4 weeks. First one that I'm like actually doing it in person. So
Cool.
I had to get that guy on. So that's fun. How do you do the just curiosity? How do you do the outreach? By the way, is finding 100 people a week? That's something.
Yeah, well, I spend time on it. Yeah, it's important to me, right? It's like, this is my business. So it's like, all right, well, who do I want to have on this? So if I want to, so here's if I was like, all right, who are 50 potential guests I could have this week? I would go, who are the podcasts that are similar to mine? So
Hmm.
Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, Chris Williamson, Ed Milet, Lewis Howes. I'd name, maybe 7 or 8 other podcasts, Sean Ryan, some of these other podcasts, and then I'd go see who all their guests are. And I would just read the descriptions of all the guests, and whichever one seemed interesting to me, I'd reach out to them. So I've had 20 guys on my podcast that have been on Joe Rogan, right? I've been on Chris Williamson's podcast. I've had Ed Milet on my podcast. So I've had Lewis Howes on my podcast. So I've had enough connections to these guys. So I would just reach out to all those people, and then I would invite them to be on my podcast.
Way to do it. I love it.
Yeah. If 47 say no, I got 3 good guests this week.
I like it. From the 650 you've interviewed, right? A lot of successful ones. It's a quality on these guys that you're like, yeah, this is
It's
practically
interesting.
anyone. Yeah.
When I was interviewing Ed Milet, he actually spoke at my big event last year, and he has one of the top podcasts in the whole world, and he interviews presidents and you name it, like the top athletes. He's the guy that he can interview just about anybody. And I asked him about that. I was like, what do the most successful people have in common? He said, Jimmy, it's one, and I've said the same thing for years. He said, the most successful people, the only difference between the people that are getting it done and the people that aren't, is people that are the highest successful. He said, they just take action, not needing to know if it's going to work. They're just willing to try things. They're willing to take action, not knowing if it's going to work out. And when they do that, eventually enough things work out, and that happens. So I think that's the biggest difference between those that do and those that don't.
I like it. Closing. If you could ensure like one lesson from your work being passed down to the people listening, people whatever being caught up with your work, what would it be?
Sure. I would say the most important thing I can tell you is to be consistent. Is like I said, I've been doing my podcast for 8 years. I've never gone a week without an episode coming out.
Hmm.
I'm very consistent human being. The things that I know I need to do every day, I do. I go to the gym every day. I make sure I go on a walk every day. I pour into the people in my life every day. Like, just being consistent. If you want something to get better, do it every single day. The problem with life, whether it's losing weight or becoming smarter or getting grounded in your body, like, or having loving relationships, day to day, you can't really see a difference. You can't really see that improvement on a daily basis. So it gets very difficult because they don't get that dopamine spike you do right away. And the stuff that's not good for us, you get a dopamine spike right away. If I go get drunk or I go eat chocolate cake or something like that, I'm going to get a little high. I'm going to get a nice little euphoria, but it's not good for me long term. And so the secret to life is getting really focused on what you want down the line and not giving up what I want most for what I want right now. And if you can get around that, then you do the right thing every day.
Love that. What's 2025 going to be like for Jimmy Rex?
It's gonna be amazing one way or the other. We're building, we're growing, and I'm also just working a lot on my own personal relationships. I just closed on a new house that I've been wanting to do for a long time now. I'm putting a pool in this week. I'm starting that, and I'm excited, man.